Yeah, it would be great to know a little bit of your background. How do you started in this software engineering career, and yeah, how do you
Yeah, let
think
me do a
about?
quick intro. Yeah. So I'm Ajinkya. Nice chatting with you again, Fran. So I'm an
Nice.
engineering manager at Meta. I've been here for a year now, and I've been in the industry for close to 15 years. Right, a major chunk of my time in the software industry has been at Microsoft. Close to a decade I spent there. Prior to Meta, I was at Microsoft. I built Microsoft Teams
Mm,
from ground up. I was leading platform messaging services for Microsoft Teams. And then prior to that, I was in a company called Slalom Consulting in Atlanta. Right, so I spent around 4 years there. That's where my software engineering journey kickstarted.
I see, I see, and you see like a big difference, big jump. I would assume from that first company to Microsoft.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
that?
I mean, the biggest differentiator was scale. But although having said that, at Slalom, I'm not sure if you've heard of Slalom. It's
No.
an American consulting firm. So it was based in Atlanta, and their model is they operate with local clients. Right. So I was a consultant at this firm. As a part of my role, I went to several offices within Atlanta. Right. I went to Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Delta Airlines,
Okay.
McKesson, and a bunch. Right. So very early on, I think I got the experience of what it means to have stakeholder communication, stakeholder alignment, right? Because each of the times we walked in, there were different leadership teams at those companies that were dealing with either problems in their existing infrastructure or they wanted to build something new and they did not have enough in-house technical expertise. That's when they roped us in, right? So, like very early on, what it means to drive clarity in situations where not a whole lot exists to begin with was embedded in me, right? So that's something I carried forward with me to Microsoft, and it kind of became a part of me. So I definitely appreciate the time I spent at Slalom, although not a big name, and probably I didn't get to work with a lot of scale. I got to get my hands dirty with a lot of different technologies, got to work with different products at different life cycles, and then also got to interact with a lot of different leaders from these different companies, how they think, what is important to them, which I think played a role in the way I operated since then.
And but the product is quite different. You go to Microsoft, and then all of a sudden, I'm quite interested in how you when you start. What are your feelings? What do you see there? Like how try to how you fit in the team at the very beginning, and then the growth. Maybe a little bit where you see how you grow, and maybe the product as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I think definitely a different setup, right? Like a huge scale, like the scale of operating a service is something I encountered a little later. Upfront, it was just the scale of the company, right? Microsoft is a ubiquitous name. It's something we have grown up knowing about. So stepping up there was definitely an exciting time for me. Right. So I initially worked there for a couple of years, I think, on the Skype for Business platform, and then
Okay,
since then I've
nice.
been working on these Teams messaging services. So yeah, I mean the problems that you encounter when you deal with several hundreds of millions of users, billions of kind of requests, that's very different. It introduces a whole different scale of problems that just does not exist um, when you're
Yeah.
dealing with a much relatively lower scale. And then besides the scale of the problem, I would say like people, right? Like one thing is you get to work with very smart people every day. And that's a big plus when you work with any of the big tech companies, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's pretty nice. So you have the surrounding of those guys, and also the delivery, yeah, requirements that are really high stakes. I'd say
Right,
that's
right.
nice. Um, yeah, I was thinking as well about then maybe thinking about the scale. That then you encounter maybe for the first time like that scale of distributed systems, and what is for you like distributed system? How do you maybe thought about that time then, and how do you think now after maybe the experience?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, to give you my first experience stepping into something of such a big scale was back when I was an IC. I was trying to introduce like a property within a database, right? A simple
Okay.
property, but to which you wouldn't
Hmm.
think much about when you aren't when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of users. It's just adding a property. You just kind of do it. right? But here, the kind of implications that that can have, right? Especially when you're doing it on a matured service, like what's going to be the read rate? What's going to be the write rate? Is the property going to be applied to all of the existing entities that are already created in the database? What's the backfill strategy? I mean, these are the kind of questions you would never think about. So that was pretty fascinating for me. That is one of my early memories from trying to do something at scale,
That
right?
is
And then since then,
interesting.
it's fascinating, yeah. And then I think since then, yeah, system design. If you aren't doing it at scale, it's not really system design. So yeah, I mean, since then it's been quite a journey, right? We've designed kind of new systems from scratch. We've migrated existing systems, and in each case, I would say it's been a trade-off, right? System design is all about trade-offs. What is it that we want to achieve? What's the outcome we
Yeah,
want to achieve for our customers? I think it's good to be user and user centric. Sometimes when you're in this
exactly.
space, the problems are so technically challenging that you tend to lose sight of it, and you may not have a direct overlap with the customer. But ultimately, whatever it is that you're building, it is for offering our customers or users a great experience, right? So it's always
Mhm.
good to have that at the back of your mind.
Yeah, you got in your previous role, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
The
nice.
user obsession, yes.
I'm really interested in just, I mean, just we can move on, but how long, if you remember that adding that column took since they tell you, we need this new in the database, and you say, well, yeah, I'll do it. They say, no, 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 don't do it. Just have a look. And then how many? 1 week, 2 weeks,
I think the adding itself
a
is not
month?
something that took very long, to be honest, but it was
Okay.
the kind of thought process that goes in before you
Okay.
make
Yeah.
even something that you would think of a simple change. Like that was like my aha moment. Like, okay, like here's where you have to be kind of conscious of everything that happens. So that the
Yeah.
processes and the systems that are set up is once you decide to make a change, it's pretty simple for you to make a change, especially for something as simple as adding a property. But the
Yeah.
kind of monitoring that you need to have, the kind of questions you need to ask yourself,
Mm.
and the implications that that can have is the fascinating part, or
Okay.
at least was the
And
fascinating part at that point of time.
yeah, now,
Yeah.
yes, another level, of course. Nice. And yeah, I was thinking as well. Then, so okay, you get to Microsoft, you do things at scale, and then you become engineering manager. And did it take long? Did you know already that you wanted to move in that direction? How did that come about?
Yeah. So I would say uh, I kind of did not chase it as one of the things I wanted to do. It kind of gradually, organically unfolded it that way. And I think I was kind of positioning for it by being a lead on my team. Right, I'd been doing that for a while. I was taking technical decisions on the team. I was driving kind of these long-running projects and strategies. So the role came about organically, and once it was offered, I wanted to give it a try. I wanted to see how it is leading teams, and I think I wouldn't look back. Like it's one of the best decisions I think I've taken since I've been an EM there.
Nice, nice. And did you see it took you a long time just to start to maybe in the team to become a leader before a manager? Do you, yeah, do you see like that it was something that you need to learn first, or you really came already with the necessary baggage to do so?
No, I think it I would say it did take some time to get myself to a position where I could call myself like a lead on the team. So I joined Microsoft as a, I would say, like a mid-level software engineer. So from there on to become like a tech lead on the team, it took some time. I went through the journey. I built some products in close partnerships with the architects that existed, and then eventually got towards an autonomous driving model. So once I got to a place where I was leading strategies and leading kind of projects, and having operated in that way for some time, is when the opportunity of kind of being an EM came to me. So yeah, I would say kind of it takes time. Like I didn't enter Microsoft with the managerial kind of experience. All of the experience that I needed to become a successful manager was something I learned within Microsoft.
Nice, but you needed to first to get with the architects, learn what they were doing, maybe a little bit, understand the context, and then start to drive the things, or maybe yeah, some projects or ideas
Yeah,
yourself.
absolutely. I think there's different ways in which people enter management. This is the journey I've followed, and I think it's important for whoever becomes a manager, no matter kind of what journey they take, to have a solid technical understanding. Even though you might not be doing that as a manager on a day-to-day basis, understanding, kind of getting your hands dirty with the tools that your team uses. Uh, Not just kind
Mhm.
of at a strategy level of what the team is supposed to be doing, but how the team does it, right? Like what are the tool sets that the team has? Just landing a change yourself makes a world of difference in the way you understand things and in the way you can kind of support the team later on.
Yeah, I remember this book I read not so long ago about the history of Xerox PARC. That maybe is the beginning of the personal computer. And one of the directors there, if not the CEO, he was always saying precisely that to be a manager, um, you cannot be a manager like in general. You need to be a manager of something, and you need to understand the business really well. And I think that's essential. And you can see that the difference between, or at least I've seen the difference between managers that are technical to those that they are not, and you see that the impact and how they deliver for sure. But okay, so maybe now we can talk a little bit about the a few
I
topics.
would
And
just like to add to
oh,
the previous point you
please.
said. I think I completely agree to that. I would say it's a fine balance, right? So in my case, I got the opportunity to be a manager on a team that I was already leading in a way from a technical standpoint, right? So I knew the ins and outs of the service that we were owning. I knew kind of the people I was working with. So for me, it was a conscious decision to step away from the day-to-day execution, right? So I was trying to solve a different problem where I do not become the bottleneck, right? Where I do not become kind of the only go-to person. I needed to build the next set of leaders. So that's a conscious decision that I took. And even though, let's say, it would have taken me a day to fix a problem, for
Mhm.
one problem, for two problems, for three problems, it's kind of okay. But as you scale, it becomes a pattern, and then you don't want, as a manager, to find yourself doing the day-to-day work, right? So you want to free yourself up for the strategy. And as a manager, your big role is kind of how do I grow the engineers on my team? And how do I set up them with the right opportunities? What's the vision for my team looking in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year? Things may change, but it's always good to have a plan. Because once you have a plan, that's where you can get the opportunities, ongoing opportunities for the team. And for you to be able to do all of that, you need to free yourself up, right? So I would say that as well. While that is true, though, going back to the point that you were mentioning, for somebody who's coming into a team without any prior context on the team, I guess kind of that has been the case for me at Meta, right? Like, so if you come in as a manager there, it's important to get your hands dirty, right? Because then you do not understand kind of uh, the same pain that the engineers go through, right? When you check out the repository, when you try to build a change locally, when you push it to the remote repository, what is it that is the long pull? Is it our build pipeline? Where is the investment to be made? Right? It's a very simple example of landing a change, but it exposes you to things that otherwise at a high level you will just not be able to explore. So I would say being a manager is being aware of what it is to operate at the ground level and then consciously choosing not to do that, so that you can scale the team better. So it's quite an interesting. Um, I just thought it was quite interesting to be honest.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
it looks interesting to me for sure. Um, yeah, but I was thinking that now that you mention, when you get in Meta and you start to try to check out the repo and build it, maybe I don't know if to deploy in a specific environment and things like that. Did you spend uh, just a month or whatever time it was, and then it stopped and started just to focus on the long term, as you just mentioned, and the people and so forth, or is something that you? I mean, because I would assume how deep the rabbit hole goes, and how deep did you go?
Yeah, so I would say it's not a one-time thing or kind of let's go deep now and then let's not kind of go deep again. It's more
Hmm.
of a recurring thing, right? So ideally, you would want to be in a position where your team leads. You grow the next set of leaders, and they are the ones operating on a day-to-day basis. But there are some peculiar situations that can happen, right? Like there is a committed launch, and the negotiations of pushing that launch out are just not possible. You have to make it happen, and then suddenly there are kind of unknowns that come about, or there is
Hmm.
a production incident, and the team is all hands on deck. During such times, just being a cheerleader as a manager is not enough, right? Like you need to roll back your sleeves and get into kind of helping the team out as you can. So there are certain times where it may be needed, and that is what I would say is leading from the front and getting along with the team. But in normal circumstances, you wouldn't. Like I don't mind find myself doing that. It's kind of strategizing, kind of setting the next roadmap. But if and when the opportunity comes, you should be prepared for it. That's my opinion as a manager, rather than kind of just supporting the team.
It sounds like a good manager to me. Like one
Yeah,
they kind of roll up the sleeves and kind of deliver. That's pretty impressive. That's very
yeah. I
nice.
mean, again, like to the what is the extent to which you would be able to do that is still a question, but the just the gesture of attempting to do that, and then there are always kind of low hanging fruits that you could take on whenever you are working on a problem, and that kind of helps.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna take this to my company, I guess, and do some suggestions. That sounds good. Yeah, I think that we could be talking about just this engineering manager for longer, but let's maybe
Yeah,
we can come back later. But
sounds
it's
good.
really
Yeah,
interesting, actually. And I was thinking as well, maybe if I guess as now that we mentioned again, uh, thinking about interviews, and I was thinking. Um, Maybe in a couple of different angles, like what's in an interview something that you can then use really on learn about the job, or what are the difference that you see that when asking questions in an interview they are related or not really to the job that you're really going to perform. So where are the limitations
mm,
of the interviews, where are the things that you can extrapolate to the real world. That would be one of them. And maybe the two different dimensions that I wanted to ask the question, maybe for you, it's when you are sit there, when you've been sitting maybe in Microsoft, or when you were sat there in Meta, or on the other way around, when you are seated as the interviewer, and if you can, yeah. What are your thoughts
yeah, yeah.
in this?
So I'd say this. I think to answer your question, is the interview the best process we have to be able to judge a candidate on how they can perform in the company? Maybe not, but I've heard from a lot of people that interview is not the ideal setup. In my opinion, there are still quite a lot of insights that you can grok about a candidate from the interview process, the way it is. And then it's pretty kind of you have to go through like at least 5 rounds in major tech companies, in the big tech companies, to be able
Yeah.
to kind of get a job, right? So, but again, like it may not be ideal, and it does not guarantee that a great interview performance is an indicator of success in the company, but
Mhm.
the insights that you can grasp from it are pretty invaluable, right? I can give you an example, right? So what I have seen a lot of candidates do is they strive for correctness, right? They try to kind of understand the question and then try to solve the question to the best degree possible, and they try to focus too much on correctness, while the interviewer and the interview is never meant to assess you on your correctness of your solution. It is meant to assess on your thought process, right?
Mhm.
How do you ask the right clarifying questions? Have you understood the problem? As you're solving the problem, oftentimes interviewers throw a curveball, right? I change the requirements on you. Can you do it in a different way? Are they able to react to those changes? Right. So that tells you a lot about the candidate, how good a communicator they are, what is their thought process. And a successful uh, candidate is often the ones who takes time before getting into coding. If you jump directly into the coding after hearing the question, that's oftentimes a red flag. And you would want to clarify the requirements of start with a pseudocode even, and coding is the absolute last thing that you do, right? So there is a lot of things that you can judge from a candidate. Another thing is I reward preparation, right? So when a candidate responds, you are able to tell what sort of effort the candidate has put in to prepare, right? The way they approach the question and then the way they respond, kind of it becomes clear that this candidate has spent a considerable amount of effort preparing. And to me, that's actually a good sign, right? Like the person is taking the job seriously and is preparing well. So, in my opinion, kind of I reward preparation, and then I look at these signals. What is not indicative from the interview performance, though, even if everything goes well, is how well the person would do in a sustained pace. Right? If you give this person like a quarter long effort or a half long effort, are they going to follow through? That consistency is something you cannot judge from a 45-minute interview, but there are quite a few insightful things you can get out of it.
Okay, that's interesting. So I never thought about that. You cannot see how, yeah, the effort in the long term that person is going to put into the job. Not if you look at yeah, what they done before, maybe what they have, yeah, in their tool belt. But okay, that's a nice one.
Uh,
All right, so uh, that's the interview. Uh, Maybe now that you said 5 rounds in each one of them,
yeah, I'd say
I'm
at least,
interested.
yeah.
I would be interested in. Do you see like a difference between Meta? Do you do interviews in both of them, or
Yeah, I would say kind of I've done a whole lot in Microsoft. Not as much in
do,
Meta, but I think I've interviewed in both places.
and do you see like there is a difference because man, not you because or you actually needed to change your strategy when you move from Microsoft to Meta?
I mean, there's going to be some subtle differences for sure, but in general, across big tech, the reason there is like at least 5 interviews is each interview is supposed to evaluate you on a very specific skill set, right?
Mm.
For a software engineering role, a lot of it is on coding, but there is also kind of system design, kind of how is your design mentality. There are, depending on the role, again, you're applying to the senior, the level of seniority, kind of your thought process, how you are as a team player, uh,
Yeah.
how's your behavioral response to situations on the team. Although I would say majority of the focus is coding, there are these other rounds as well. And then again, like for coding, there are oftentimes multiple rounds because one coding problem and how you solve it cannot be a judge. So when you are thrown like a couple of different problems and a couple of people, different people evaluating you, the average of that is considered, right? So I think that's the typical interview process across big tech.
And is there anything that you could recommend to anybody to, if they are going to apply to Microsoft or Meta, they should be reading or practicing or I don't know, anything at all?
Yes, especially in today's age, right, with vibe coding. Coding, I would say, is not as important a skill. With time, it's going to be outdated, I believe. But what is important is your thought process, right? Like your core concepts of your algorithm, system design. That is not going to go away, right? So have a solid understanding. Practice, right? Like practice is kind of the key. Now, what you practice on, the nature of interviews are changing, so that may change. Uh,
Mm.
but there are kind of resources out there, right? Like there is, I forget the name of but there's a popular one out there. People
You can
use
tell
it
me
for.
later, and I can put it.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of those the lead code I think is something people use. Like for my preparation, I didn't use it too much to be honest. Um, Prepare well, but also I would say don't over prepare because you would like to approach the interview with a clean mindset. Having strong fundamentals help. Ask
Mm.
clarifying questions. Kind of understand what is the problem to be solved. Uh, Communicate, right? Like get on the same page with your interviewer. Your interviewer will kind of either directly or indirectly throw hints of whether or not you're on the right track. Be conscious of those, right? And
Okay,
approach coding as the absolute last thing that you do. Have like a solid algorithm in your head and think out loud. Explain that to your interviewer.
that's interesting. Nice, good to know. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about architecture, like at that scale again. Your Microsoft, Meta, like things are, yeah, um, big stakes there are well as well. And I was thinking that maybe, how would you approach when there are different maybe teams or inside a team and there are disagreements? and how do you approach those situations, and how do you approach maybe the trade-offs that you see in there, maybe those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, so there's always going to be I mean, the disagreements can stem from something as simple as naming a variable. I've seen that, right? Like, what should we name a variable? Like, it's the simplest of the problems, but there could be like philosophical discussions on even that. From that to, like I mentioned, like if you are designing migration strategies, what should be our life cycle? What phases should we pass them through? If you're building a new service, what should be our tech stack? What cloud service provider we should use? What database we should use? If you're kind of building a new component, how should that be structured? The hierarchy. So disagreements oftentimes stem from simple to more complex things, but it's good to have a framework of disagreement resolution. And as leaders, it is your job to create that apparatus, right? Where you could have disagreements, but have like a clear ownership on what is it that we are trying to solve, and who's the owner or who's the POC for that problem, right? Oftentimes, what happens is at the end of the day, you have like three or four approaches. Each of them is equally right or equally wrong, the way you look at it. What is an acceptable trade-off, right? What are we designing for? And I like to stay pragmatic, right? Like a lot of discussion sometimes evolves in how would this change in the future? Thing is, future is uncertain, like nobody knows. So yes, have the foresight, but be pragmatic and solve for today's problem, right? And then be conscious of what you're disagreeing. uh, there's a famous principle, right? Disagree to commit. So be okay with disagreements, but document what you've decided and why you have decided, and then in the future, if you have to revisit, you have a good trail of that. So I would say two things, like having a right apparatus, giving the autonomy to the POCs to make the decisions, and then documenting every trade-off choice that was made.
Oh, POC for you, what is that? Because proof
I
of
mean, like,
concept
so
is not.
when you work on like big teams, there are not just one, but there are multiple technical leads and multiple architects. Right. So
Okay,
having a clear ownership responsibility on kind of who would make decisions on certain things goes a long way.
and that's part of the framework that you would put in place. Just that, and maybe so. I can imagine that in some teams, as always, I mean, there are some tensions. There are people that want to lead, but maybe they don't have the role yet, but they think they are right. And uh, yeah, maybe you want to tell me a little bit of a few examples or something about how would you approach specific situation examples that come to mind, that when you saw people and maybe they were right, but they weren't the person to take the call. And so I guess I'm adding not only the experience and the to be right, but also the human factor, that
Yeah.
if you can talk on that a little bit, your experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's always one of the key things you do as a manager is to create a safe space for your team members, right? And give everyone create an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes, right? And then
Yeah,
also on the flip
that's
side to it is
important.
give them autonomy so that they can kind of make the decisions, right? But again, it depends on what the decision is for. If it is about kind of creating a
A
new service
valuable.
and what cloud service to use, typically those discussions happen at a much higher level, and then there are several factors that go in it, like who your company has contracts with, like what you should be doing. But then if you're talking about something simple as what happens in the realm of a product or a service that the team owns, and then you're building new features and how you are supposed to build that, that should be completely on the feature area owners, right? And in terms of to your other point of the people who may not be in a position to make decisions, typically like what happens at big tech companies is there is a lot of autonomy, right? So even you don't need to be getting to a certain level to be able to make decisions. Even as an entry level engineer who has built enough experience and context from the team, that person in the areas that the person is leading is empowered to take those decisions. There is a review process. There are people who offer kind of the pros and cons, and there's consultation that happens. But then typically the people in charge of certain areas that you have entrusted them with would need to be the final decision maker,
Okay.
right?
Yes, you mentioned execution, and I was thinking also again maybe move a bit away, not too much, but what would be maybe the trade-offs that you do between execution sometimes, at scale reliability, and maybe long-term planification or architectural? What if you see that sometimes, how do you juggle between those three, saying like, well, I need to deliver this now. um, uh, for me, the most important, maybe something that what you already said, that I need to deliver now, but with an MCP, MVP, that's completely fine if it's not great, but obviously not even that reliable, or and how you see how you move, and um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I would say kind of those are distinct things and they all kind of exist at the same time. It really is situational. It depends on kind of what space you're operating in and what is the level of maturity to the product or the service you're building. Like, for example, if it's a greenfield initiative, you're building something from ground up, you move fast. Right? Execution is the kind of the ultimate focus. Then you arrange yourself in ways that you can move fast. Sometimes for some teams, it's like weekly sprints. I would argue, like in a startup environment, it's almost daily sprint. Kind of you move at the speed
Mhm.
of light. Uh, then kind of there's a on the flip side, you have a mature service used by hundreds of millions of users. Right? For in those cases, while you would want to move fast on certain features, reliability is the ultimate focus. Right? You want your service uptime. That is one of your key metrics that you're measuring. Kind of the cost efficiencies because you build so much, you're running on so many things. So the way I look at reliability is offering customers who use your product or service the best experience possible, be it kind of 100% availability, be it the lowest latency. There are different metrics that the platform teams need to measure, but get there if you're not there yet. And then once you're there, maintain it. Have framework in place where any new development that happens does not regress any of those metrics. But that becomes the key when you are at that level of maturity.
I mean, you mentioned Skype, Teams, like small things. Um, so would you say like in those is reliability both? And I don't know, Meta, if you can say now where you're working, probably not, but which one is the one you care the
Yeah, as I
most?
said, like at Microsoft, like I built teams from ground up. So while I was building it, I have seen it on the both the sides. Like execution was
At the
the key, right?
beginning.
I've operated in that environment, but once it got to that level of maturity, where it was used by so many users that it is now, definitely the focus shifted. The org's focus shifted towards reliability, right? Because that was the most important thing to protect the customers. Think about it, like if you have like very few users, or if you're building something from ground up, if something breaks, like it does not impact users as much. When you are at scale, like the anything that breaks, the failures, they are very loud in the impact that they cause. And then interestingly, they are very soft in the root cause. It is, you cannot pinpoint the root cause to one thing. Maybe you can pinpoint the trigger to one thing, but the trigger often exposes like several interconnected dependencies that just
Okay.
worked until they didn't work, right? Like so
Yes.
once things scale, like you're not talking about one service, you're not talking about one root cause. It's a whole set of interconnected universe. And that's where I think getting your fundamentals right becomes the key. And I think incidents and post incident mitigations have been one of the most interesting parts of my journey, if you ask me, to understand at a very deep level the service reliability.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking that I definitely I will ask you for incidents, but I was thinking that on the that you mentioned already, in the long term architecture, that sometimes don't worry so much. Try to deliver something in. You also mentioned about 1 day sprints, which I never heard. I find pretty cool. I'm very sure that many managers would think, oh, I like that. I want more of that,
When
depending
you are
upon
working
what.
on greenfield initiatives, yeah, you may not even label it that way, but you just kind of move at the speed of light because kind of everything is ground up. You can deploy as many times as you want. I mean, there's nobody using your product, so you can go like you can have a party.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And on that realm, I was thinking something that bothers me sometimes is like the agile idea. And if you have, I don't know if you ever heard this thing that the agile with uppercase that doesn't let you be agile with lowercase. What you have any thoughts about that?
Like I mentioned, like it's again like at different stages of the life cycle, teams operate in different ways, and then also teams sometimes can benefit from having a structured sprint. But in my experience, in all of the big tech, typically you are working on so many diverse problems and things are changing so fast that you
Hmm.
don't have a well defined sprint as such, right? You have like different sets of projects that different members of your team are operating, and each of them has the autonomy to track it in whichever way kind of they want. So process should never become a bottleneck, right? I'm a firm believer of process to be as lightweight as possible, and kind of like oftentimes processes are created to solve problems, but as time goes by, those problems either are not there anymore or they evolve, and then the processes should also evolve with them. Otherwise, it becomes a waste of time, frankly, for everyone involved.
A problem in itself to solve, I
Yeah.
think. And and then how do you communicate if you don't have this? Which how do you find what are the maybe the best ways to communicate what is being done, what is needed to be done?
Yeah, that's a very good kind of point, because there are different kinds of communications that happen, and like oftentimes I've found engineers to have been spending time a lot on communicating updates to different stakeholders, like communicating it to either their managers, to PMs, to leadership team. So there needs to be that process needs to be optimized for engineers pretty heavily, right? Like the communications is something like as a manager, you would need to have a setup where you track things, but then that setup does not need to be like a central or a ubiquitous one for the entire team. Different team members can be working on different projects and could be tracking things in their own ways.
Mm.
It kind of becomes your responsibility to merge that. And now with the advent of AI, it's kind of easy to do that. Even even before kind of AI, in the pre-AI world,
Mm.
um, there were kind of things. You had monthly service reviews or monthly product reviews. You had kind of weekly leadership, in some cases weekly, in some cases bi-weekly or monthly. So there is a format through which you could deliver the updates, but as a manager, I think it is in the best interest of your team if you are the one who tries to consolidate and keep things in a way where it makes sense and you can track whether something is green, something is not green, and then what the blockers are, right?
Hmm. So instead of maybe of dropping the process on your team, you just kind of keep it to yourself to just to gather all the information that you need to know what things are being done and what needs to be done, and so you take ownership so far somehow.
Oftentimes, kind of that is something that I've found in teams at this scale. But as I said, like depending on the situation you're in, and if all of the team is solving kind of one problem, then it becomes easy to set up a sprint. And that has like a shared visibility and everything is kind of ideal. It's tracked. You have this Kanban and other things. But typically that does not happen because
Yeah.
not the whole team is solving kind of one problem.
Okay, that's interesting to hear,
Yeah.
especially in that kind of scenario where you work.
Yeah, I've seen that happen a lot in the smaller companies that I worked at, because the scope of what you were solving was defined, and
Mhm.
I think it made sense to do it that way. The other part to process, although I would also argue, just countering my own point, is not just to deliver updates and track the status of the project. It is to create a sense of accomplishment within the team, right? So from that perspective,
Okay.
having some setup, even lightweight, helps, right? So the team feels recognized for the progress that has happened, which is also equally important besides kind of just making progress and delivering something.
Yeah. To checking the box is always, yeah, it's been studied and that works,
Right.
and that's helpful. And yeah, maybe just to finish up, I was thinking what you mentioned about incidents. That I mean, I don't know what you must have seen very scary things at that scale. And I was just wondering, like maybe what were uh, yeah, examples that you saw that you really remember, and the assumptions that they were maybe broken in those scenarios, or the
Yeah.
lessons that you kind of
I mean, I've
learned
seen
out of
so
it?
many, and then there's so many lessons I've learned. In fact, my deeper experience of understanding distributed systems is through incidents, I would say. That can be an entire
Yeah.
conversation of its own. So I have so many, maybe I can, because in the spirit of kind of this conversation around scale and distributed systems, I can maybe give you a simple example, right? Like think about kind of a setup where you have a service and you have a single instance of a service, right? Typically, when the service starts up, it has a startup process, it does a few things, and then you scale that. You have the 2 instances, you have 10 instances, you have 100 instances in one region, right? You're also talking about like services which are multi-region, multi-geo. That scales out further, right? You have tens of regions, and then you have hundreds of instances of the service per region. Now, what you do in your startup process matters to a degree that you never thought about when you were running in a single
Mhm.
region or a single instance. Is your process setup taking too long? Are you calling? Do you have single points of failure? Are you calling like a service that could be overwhelmed because now there are multiple such instances? What is your deploy? Are they all kind of getting deployed at the same time? Right. So these, there have been a few kind of incidents around this theme, but
Uh,
again, like going back to tying it to the initial example that I mentioned, right? Like adding a single property or a single field in a database, like what kind of things could happen. Here is another example where you started off with one service in a single region. Now your service gets popular. You have a lot of users on board across the world. Your service gets deployed everywhere. But then simple things like what you do during the process boot up may not be optimized, or may not be optimized for a 1,000 instance service, right? And
yeah.
that those are the kind of things that get exposed when inefficiencies exist in the system, which
So I
may
guess
not be intentional. At that time, you didn't think of it as an inefficiency, but that's where like scale challenges your assumptions.
exactly, and I was thinking that, well, something that you said before, that uh, sometimes you just you need to just to wait and for the long-term decisions or long-term architecture. So you go bit by bit, and until you don't actually face the problem, or you start to see that it's going to be a problem, you don't need to spend the cycles there thinking about it or solving something that is still not even there.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's a matter of being conscious as well, because I've seen a lot of discussions where they get philosophical and theoretical. They create an impediment to progress, right? So in this case,
Mm.
let's say, I don't know, this probably is not a good example of the same use case, but if you talk about the evolution of a service to get from a state where you start working on it as a greenfield initiative to a state where a lot of services don't even get to that state, right? Like only like in certain cases you get to a place where you
Yeah,
can have like multiple regions and instances. So one, that problem may or may not even arise for you, and two, when it arises could be like several years down the line. But in order to try to optimize for something that may not happen, you do not, like one other thing I like to say, right? Like don't let perfection be an enemy of progress. So make progress be measured and document the decisions you have made, and have like goods apparatus to give you a call back when the next stage of scale comes about to be, if it comes about to be.
yeah. I love that one, definitely. The adagio and the idea behind, for sure. I
Right.
think it's really, really good. So that's all the questions I have. So I don't know if I didn't ask you or something that you would like me to ask, or to say something that.
No, really, I think this was a very nice conversation.